Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Shannon Wolf. I'm the Managing Director and Chief of Staff at AAUW, and I am thrilled that we have three wonderful panelists with us today to take us through today's program. First off, I'd like to introduce Melissa Ingram. Melissa is a member of our National Inclusion and Equity Committee and is also a national member of AAUW. We also have Constance Hope with us today. Constance is also a member of our National Inclusion and Equity Committee and is a member of our Easton Maryland branch. And last but certainly not least, we have Jessie Orenberger, and Jessie is also a member of our National Inclusion and Equity Committee. And Jessie is a longtime presenter of our Work Smart and Start Smart programs in Boston and is also a national AAUW member. So I'm so thrilled to have you all with us today to talk about this really important topic. If you haven't had a chance yet to check out the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Toolkit on our website, I would highly recommend that you do so. That toolkit was developed by the Exclusion and Equity Committee and is being updated by the committee, as well as some plug and play programs that can help you with your branch programming. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today for sure. The format of today's session is really going to be a presentation by Melissa, Constance, and Jessie on key terms and concepts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, including microaggressions, the difference between equity and equality, and many other key terms and concepts. And then Melissa is going to take us through the plug and play program. And that's really going to be programs that you can do within your branch on this topic. And over the course of the next year, the Inclusion and Equity Committee is going to be working on more plug and play programming, and those programs will be available on the website as they come online. So look for those next year for sure. We'll definitely preserve some time at the end of the session today for questions and answers. So if you have those, please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. A bit of housekeeping today, we're going to use the chat function for technical issues. If you can't see, can't hear, having some issues with the Zoom, please do put that in the chat box. And in the Q&A, please do put any substantive questions on today's topic or on the DEI Toolkit or any other questions you want to ask our wonderful members of the Inclusion and Equity Committee. Just to note that we are not using the raised hand function today as well. So without further ado, I'm going to switch it over to Melissa and have her start her presentation. Melissa, over to you.
Thanks so much, Shannon. We're so excited to be here today and talk to everyone about just the basics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So hopefully you all have attended some of our other webinars that got us prepped to this point. Our other webinars included having difficult conversations and starting community agreements so we could then talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a safe space for all of our members. But what we'd like to do today, I think the poll is up. So if you haven't seen the poll, please give us your thoughts on how comfortable you are using the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion in a conversation. We're very thankful that the majority, or at least half of you online today, are comfortable using these terms. So if you're comfortable using these terms, hopefully the resources can help you explore them with some folks that may not be as comfortable or may help you gain a deeper understanding of these terms and how they can be applied in different settings. So thanks so much for everyone that participated in the poll. So first things first, we always want to show you how to get to the toolkit. So there are two different ways to get to the toolkit. One is through the membership tag at the very top of the AAUW page. So once you click on that membership button, click then on governance and tools. The other way to get to it is by using the search feature. And from the search feature, then type in DEI Toolkit. Both options will take you to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Toolkit. Once you're there, please click on that link. And for today's discussion, the foundation of today's discussion is going to be in the Key Terms and Concepts tab. So once you click on the Key Terms and Concepts tab, you'll just get an overview of DEI. The part of this overview that we're going to talk about today is the diversity, inclusion, and equity portion. The other 6 will be later plug and plays that we'll do starting in fall of 2021. So what is diversity? We like to start off all of our talks with just a very basic definition of what these terms are. So diversity can be summed up as variety. And variety, it could be a number of things. You can have diverse thought, diverse people, diverse organizations, right? Now, in terms of what we like to consider diversity, we will explore all of those different dimensions later on. But diversity is literally just anything that's different about you as a person, your mindset, eye color, things like that. To explore that basic definition with others, we like to give additional resources. So some of these resources include readings, some of them are videos, some are websites, and then some are activities. And two activities that we would like to highlight for you today are the silent interview activity and the diversity training games and exercises website. So for those of you who have been longtime AAUW members, you may recognize the silent interview activity as something from the old Inclusion Toolkit. So we like to carry that over because we thought it was a great activity. So in this activity, you'll get a handout for what the facilitator should do, and then you'll get a handout for what the your participants should do, right? And I like this exercise because it allows you to explore and reflect on your own ideas and your own actions in a group setting. The second activity that I thought was really important is this face value activity from, it's a WorkSmart website. It's not the AAUW WorkSmart website, but it's a WorkSmart website. And this face value is great because all you need is a deck of cards, and you can conduct this activity with as many or as few people as you'd like. As long as you read the instructions, and here you have about 3 to 5 minutes to get together in a group and reflect on how you acted based on what card you think you had. So it's almost like examining how you function in a class system. So with that, I know that was a fairly quick overview of diversity, but we'll talk a little bit more on how to apply these things in the plug and play programming. But with that, I will turn this over to Jessie.
Great. So I'm going to talk about the I of DEI, and that is inclusion. And we're actually pairing inclusion with belonging as well. They frequently are two words that go together when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Belonging sometimes gets tacked on there as well. And inclusion is making people a part of a group. So including others in your organization, at your work, in your friend group, etc. And belonging is making those folks feel welcome. So there is a difference between inclusion and belonging. And I was joking with Melissa and Constance the other day, saying I was going to use a fake example, and I was going to make sure that I told everybody this is fake. They're very nice to me. But inclusion is if Melissa and Constance said, "Hey, Jessie, come and do this webinar with me," that's inclusion. But if they went off and had all the meetings for what we were going to do and what we were going to present without me, then I don't really feel like I belong or I'm part of this webinar committee. So there is a difference between inclusion and belonging, and it's important to consider both when you are thinking about policies and making people feel welcome. Next slide, please. Thanks. So on the Toolkit website, you can actually see a definition between inclusion and belonging, and we have resources that cover both. Next slide, please. And with inclusion and belonging, we also wanted to address microaggressions. That's a key term that we have used, I think, multiple times in the past few webinars. And it came to our attention that not everybody actually knows what microaggressions are or what that means. So we've included this new section in the key terms section of the toolkit on microaggressions, what they are and how they fit in. And again, microaggressions come in with inclusion and belonging, because if someone is experiencing a microaggression, they will not feel like they belong. Microaggressions are these small indignities, small insults that really get at and target someone because of a particular group that they belong to. Next slide, please. We included some resources on microaggressions, and I just wanted to point out in particular 2 of the videos by at the bottom, Understanding Microaggressions and Responding to Microaggressions. They're cute little 1 to 2 minute cartoons, but they really actually do a fantastic job of explaining what a microaggression is and how it makes someone feel and how to respond to one. So if you're unsure of what that term means, or you want to make sure that everybody in your group understands what it means, I highly recommend those videos because they're very succinct and very easy to understand. Next slide, please. And we also wanted to highlight one of the activities for talking about inclusion and belonging. The activity that I pulled out that I like to do is actually under the for students section, but it works just as well for adults. And it's the Inclusion Exclusion Awareness activity. Next slide, please. And basically what you're doing is you're asking folks to think about a time when they've felt welcome, and think about a time when they have felt excluded from something. What made them feel excluded? What were the characteristics of that? And then do some reflection and sharing with each other. This is a great activity to do with your branch. And also to take it a step further is to think about what are things collectively as a group we can do differently to make people feel included, or what are things that we may have done inadvertently in the past that maybe excluded someone. So you can do it, have everybody sort of reflect on a personal experience and then take it to a larger group. And again, as Melissa said, we'll go more into the plug and play and activities for this as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Constance.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to talk about the difference between equality and equity, because we have found that in conversations about race and racism, that these words are used or are being used interchangeably, and they are very different in this context. And so we wanted to share with you these differences and some activities that I'll talk about in a minute. These 2 words do have the same root, but they have very different meanings. So could I have the next slide, please? So this is the definition from Merriam-Webster. When we talk about the equality, we're talking about the quality, a state of being equal. But what does equal mean? Using the same measure, quantity, amount, or number as another, being alike in quality, nature, or status, etc. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So what is the difference between equality and equity? You can see here that Merriam-Webster defines equity as justice according to natural law or right, specifically freedom from bias or favorite, something that is equitable. But again, what does that mean? So let's see what the next slide will tell us. So equality means everyone gets the same access to or the amount of something. Equity, on the other hand, means everyone has equal access, and that's the key word, to what they need to be successful. So I hope you see that difference. Everyone gets the same, that's equality, or you get what you need, the access to what you need for equity. Could we move on to the next slide, please? So in the resources that are available in the toolkit, we'll have some printed materials that you can read, articles and so forth that will go into some depth about the difference between equity and equality. Could we have the next slide? And there are several websites that you can click on to, and again, you will find some explanations in various ways about how equity and equality are different. There's some activities that you can use with students to define the difference. And in the workplace, we have some training programs for managers, some activities that you can use. Next slide, please. But what we'd like to highlight, which I think this will make it very clear what the difference is between equality and equity. This first video, I think we're going to show that, right?
These days, we hear a lot of people using the word equity, but what does it really mean? It's not quite the same as equality, which means everybody gets treated the same. Equity is about fairness. It means that everybody gets what they need based on their own situation, because we're not all the same. The difference between equality and equity is important. It's part of the reason the United States spends more on healthcare per person than any other advanced nation and has much poorer health. It's important to remember that a person's health depends on many factors, things like their environment, schools, and workplaces, to name a few. We call these social determinants of health, like clean drinking water for children and easy access to fresh food. We can follow the lead of communities like Columbia Gorge in Washington and Oregon, where businesses, doctors, and farmers tackled the local hunger problem with the Veggie RX voucher program. And the New Jersey Partnership for Healthy Kids is bringing down high rates of obesity in underserved communities. We should be inspired by these local efforts and remember that health equity is all about making things better for all of us. When everyone's healthy, everyone benefits.
Thank you. Okay, so there are a number of videos that make it very clear there. I'm sure you all have seen the one of the three people standing by a fence trying to watch a baseball game, and you have people standing on the same level of crates trying to see over the fence, and they're not. All of them are not able to see it. Only the tallest guy, the short kid, cannot see it. The next part of that video shows that they have the different levels of crates that they're standing on, so that the shortest person now has what he or she needs to see over the fence. That is equity, and shows the difference between equity and equality. So that video is on here as well. So I encourage you to take a look at all of these and see what works for you. I think that is it for equity and equality.
So next, let's talk about our plug-and-play programming. So we have slightly different versions of this plug-and-play that we employed for the community agreements and having difficult conversations webinars. Now for this plug-and-play programming, we wrote it like a lesson plan. So hopefully it's easy for facilitators of any level to be able to follow along and generate some really great discussion among your members. So these plug and play programs can be found in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Toolkit. Scroll down to the bottom to the plug and play DEI programming for today's plug and play lesson. And then we broke it down into various parts. So the first part is just the overview and really, why are we here? What are we talking about? What are the goals? And in this instance, the goal is to understand the difference between diversity, equity, inclusion, and have a good conversation about it, that we can all come to a common understanding. We may not agree, but we at least understand each other's point of view and can start talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and then our other more advanced topics from a same point of reference. Now, if you're the facilitator for the event, what we tried to do is set you up to succeed. So we told you what to do prior to the event. For this event, we recommend that you read the sections on diversity, equity, and inclusion so you understand AAUW's view as the baseline for your discussions. Doesn't mean that that's all you can discuss. We really encourage you to explore your own thoughts. We just want to provide that baseline. We think that you should also read through the additional resources for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and choose at least one of them to use in your event. That could be a reading, that could be one of the actual activities, the hands-on things, it could be a video. But read through it, see which one may fit, or one or two may fit your branch or your organization best. And then prep. Do your notes, write things down, maybe ask some questions or write some questions down that you may want to ask in case you're not getting some good conversation. But we also think that it's important right before the event happens to go back and look at the difficult conversation section of the AAUW Toolkit. So if you haven't seen that webinar, that the recording is on the AAUW website, and then we do have the difficult conversations activities and resources available for you on the website itself. And then if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything that we may be able to do at the national level to help you better, please send us an email. We'd love to help. So, and you can reach us at diversity@aauw.org. So once you're in the program, you've gathered your folks together, everyone's in the room, excited to talk about DEI. We try to break this down by time so you can plan accordingly. Now, these are just rough estimates. These may go shorter or longer depending on how much interaction you have with your team. But we always start off with an icebreaker. So this icebreaker, we suggest that you write down your personal definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And once everyone has these written down, you as the facilitator should form some small groups to compare all of those definitions and actually start the discussion. And then create one common definition among these small groups. The facilitator will then have all these groups present their definitions to create a bigger discussion among now the entire team. But we think it's important to be able to reflect on the individual and the small group definitions throughout the session. So we recommend not throwing those away or erasing them, however you want to do your session. And then the next part of this is to take the definitions that were generated by your members and compare them with the AAU accepted definitions. And we try to include some questions to ask to compare and contrast what was brought up among your teams and what AAUW thinks is just the baseline for our conversation. In other parts, sorry, I'll go back. So in other parts of this plug and play programming, we outline the resources that you'll need, whether it's writing utensils. We outline what we think the facilitator should do before, after, and what we think that the members should do before, during, and after the event as well. So with that, hopefully, we can get you a little bit excited about our next year topics. Our next year topics cover a lot of the rest of the key terms, such as understanding implicit and conscious bias, allyship, creating inclusive spaces, the intersectionality, and social justice. So with that, I will stop sharing screen, but I think we have another poll. So based on what we did today, let's see. Can you tell us how comfortable you feel using these terms now? Okay, well, based on your feedback, it looks like more of you are comfortable talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and using these terms, which is great. We're glad that you learned something from this webinar. Let's see if we can move on to poll 2, maybe. There we go. Okay. And then how much, based on today's conversation, did your comfort level change? Okay. So it looks like we have a good mix of if your comfort level grew, how much it grew based on today. So I'm not going to take offense at the 0 to 19 because so many of you were already really comfortable talking about this. So thanks so much. And we hope that those of you who attended today want to share your knowledge with us because we can always make this toolkit better and more robust. Having said that, I think that ends the formal portion. We have anything for our Q&A?
Sure, we have a few good questions here in the Q&A, and feel free to add to those as well as we have this discussions. Let's see, let's start with Yvonne had a great question about she would like materials dealing with the issue of survival in dealing with microaggressions. Sometimes we may not feel safe dealing with them or confronting an aggressor. Can you speak to the resources that are currently in the toolkit and whether there are some resources around that?
In terms of the microaggressions, there's just, to be quite honest, not that much on there quite yet. We wanted to get the definition out there and some of the basics, but that's absolutely something that we can add. So thank you for bringing it to our attention, and we will get that up there.
Great, thank you, Jessie. What is the difference, if any, between inclusion and inclusivity? The latter, I hear the latter used a lot lately. Also, when doing these exercises, how can we ensure it's truly a safe space for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color members to share their experiences, especially if there are very few BIPOC present who may not feel that they completely belong to the group?
Melissa, are you going to answer? Or do you want me to answer? I'll start. In terms of inclusion versus inclusivity, they are really similar terms, and I think it varies based on who's using the terms. From my own totally personal perspective, and from what I have heard, is inclusion is usually used more as a descriptor for the goal, the end goal, like we want to be inclusive, whereas inclusivity is generally used a little bit more talking about practices within a workplace, within a group, how to actually be inclusive, and sort of dovetails with belonging in that definition as well. So if someone's not using belonging as a term, they might be using inclusivity as a term. I'm not sure, Melissa or Constance, if you've heard differently, but that's sort of what how I have heard it.
Agreed.
And in terms of comfort level, I think this is where the community guidelines are going to be really important. These activities might not be activities that you dive into as your very first activity. Community guidelines and getting to know the group to feel comfortable with the group is going to be a good first step. And then also doing the how to have difficult conversations as well. Making sure that everybody is comfortable having difficult conversations so that when topics of people feeling excluded, particularly within the group that is having the discussion, can be a safer space because everybody is abiding by those community guidelines. And you can always pause, take a breath, and say, like, let's reflect back on our community guidelines. And maybe the conversation needs to pause and pick up at a later time. But I think laying the groundwork, laying the foundation of getting to know the group before diving into these more sensitive topics can be really helpful to make people feel like they can bring up these sensitive topics and bring up areas where there needs to be improvement.
I would also add that it's important to build that trust from the beginning and using ideas from the theory of conversational intelligence, where you start off with ways to build trust, and that will differ from group to group. But if you can establish that and get the good chemistry flowing, I think that adds to what you're saying, Jesse. Building that psychological safety space.
So, and something I think that we included in that building a safe space in our community agreements and difficult conversations is setting those ground rules to ensure that the safe space continues. So if you've done that, which we hope that you have, hopefully you have them handy and you can always keep them posted and visible when you start these types of conversations as a reference tool and a guideline to make sure that everyone is safe in their conversation.
Melissa, we had a few folks who have asked if you could share the 2022 topics again. Would you mind doing that? Perfect, thank you. So these are going to be the topics that the Inclusion and Equity Committee is going to develop the plug and play programs on. And those will be available on the website as they are developed and completed. And just like you've seen with this one, I'll have the same sections. I think that timing aspect that Melissa mentioned earlier is really good and can kind of give you just a little bit of a guidepost as to sort of how long those discussions should take. But it really is about what works for you in your branch, and every discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion topics is different. And so it's really just playing it by ear once you sort of get in there, but I think they are really good as guide rails. Melissa, anything else you wanted to mention on these?
So we'll have an after seminar, after webinar poll that comes out that will ask all of you your thoughts on these topics, and if there are any other topics that we should be including in the toolkit or plug and play programming. So your I&E committee really wants to hear from you on what's important. So please take the time when you get that after webinar survey to fill it out, because we would love your feedback.
Do you have any good advice for questions that arise when you execute the activities? Sandra put a question in the Q&A that is good information and good to have, but sometimes more questions come up when you're sort of in the work and doing the exercises or reading something together as a group. Any tips for our facilitators on that?
I have a couple. One is, it's okay if you don't know the answer, right? This is meant to be a discussion. So it's key that we wrote the word facilitator for a reason. You're the facilitator in handling these discussions. You're not the teacher. You're not expected to be the expert. So if there's a question that comes up that you're not, that maybe that's outside of your comfort zone or your knowledge area, that's actually awesome. That's how we all grow together. So feel free to throw that back at the group, because that's probably a really good point for everyone to start talking and start exploring how they feel. If you get to a point that no one has any idea how to answer that question, it's okay to table it. Part of having a difficult conversation is doing like a parking lot and writing it down to follow up later, right? Maybe you go back as the facilitator and do some research and bring it back to the group at a later time. And now you get to have a discussion, right? So as long as people feel heard, in my opinion, it's okay if you don't have the one right answer, because that's not the point of any of these activities, is to have one right answer. It's to be able to talk and share and go from there. But Jesse, Constance, what are your thoughts?
Spot on.
Terrific. Well, we have quite a bit of resources on the website now with the toolkit, and as we're developing more programming and more resources for folks. Do you have, and a lot of our branch leaders are doing over the summer, are going to be doing a lot of planning for their programming for the coming year. Do you have a preferred or recommended, I should say, cadence to what you think folks should be tackling first? Or how would you recommend, given all of the information that's so great and amazing that's out there, what would you recommend they tackle first?
And that's a great question. We recommend to do pretty much follow the order of the webinars. So we tried to scaffold this for everyone because it's important to understand how to have a difficult conversation before you try to have a difficult conversation. It's important to understand, and really even before that, it's the community agreement. Understand where your branch is or where your state is in terms of how they feel about diversity and inclusivity, right? Engaging that to gauge now where you want to go and get those goals as a leadership team or as a branch. And now you get to have all the conversations after that to explore your own thoughts and topics. So we recommend going in the order of the webinars. And if anyone has an issue finding where the webinars are, we can send that out. But please send us an email and we'll be more than happy to show you.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. We have an interesting question here from Suman, who says, we've just started a social justice and diversity interest group. What can we do beyond having conversations about it? Asking because we are still figuring it out. I have some thoughts here, but I would love to hear from our panelists about what they think.
I'm staring at Jessie because she's about to lead a different equity webinar. So Jessie, if you have any thoughts, please.
I think that's a hard question. I don't know the answer, to be quite frank. But I think looking at what the goals of the group are in terms of like, are you looking internally or are you looking externally for your community? What do you see as pressing needs for your community? Is that something that you all are passionate about? And then actually finding out like who else are the stakeholders. So, I think going out and tackling a problem is awesome, but there might be already people doing that work and you don't want to sort of steamroll over others. So taking a pulse of like what actually is needed, and then how can you best as a group be helpful and then if there's nothing happening, for that particular area, then you have a little bit more flexibility to design and figure out what you want to do as a group and establish your own goals and benchmarks.
Thanks, Jessie. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that it's really important to sort of figure out if you are looking internally or externally. And also, what have you come together to do, right? When you sort of first put the group together, was it for personal learning? Was it to align your branch program activities perhaps with, diversity, equity, and see your programming through a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens? That's what I would really be asking myself. And I think there are a lot of ways that this work really can coalesce with the mission work of the branch. And asking questions like, what communities are we serving through our programming? And are those the communities that we want to be serving? I think this is a really good opportunity, not only for personal learning, but to apply it to what your branch is doing on a substantive level as well. Do have a question here. Let's see. Elizabeth writes, I'm the DEI board member for my chapter. I proposed doing a DEI workshop and seem to have no takers. What else can I do to promote DEI at and in my local chapter? Constance, I'm wondering if you could weigh in on this, perhaps. I'm not sure, you have such a good branch view from your branch there in Maryland. What's been your experience in doing this work with the branch? Did you have any advice for Elizabeth?
Only that I am very new on. I am our DE&I chair in our branch as well, and we are just beginning. We have chosen diversity and inclusion as our theme for this coming year. So we will be doing more work than we have in the past. So, and I'm in the process of encouraging more interest in this. So I think we just have to keep talking to people and trying to demonstrate the importance of the topic and how it relates to them. Because if people don't see how what we're talking about relates to them, they're not going to be interested. So somehow the marketing of the program needs to, as we know in communication, you need to know your audience. So understand what's important to your audience and then try to frame the D&I conversation in a way that touches them and is of interest to them and the things that's important to them. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Constance. I think that's such a great point. And a lot of folks are really just starting out with this work. So I would encourage you not to be discouraged by it. Sometimes it takes a while for people to get comfortable with these topics and to understand the importance of them. And so, you know, as I said, a lot of folks are just starting out. So I would say really just trying to keep at it and to schedule something and to have a conversation, even if it's with 2 or 3 people. You can start that work in many, many ways. Kathleen asks, do we have to have a specific DEI event or can we incorporate into newsletters or meetings? Melissa, you want to tackle this one?
Sure. Absolutely. I think any and all ways to get out DEI and to have a conversation or get people thinking about it is beneficial. We do recommend activities just because we're a team, right? And those activities now allows us to talk together, to build our commonality or share our diversity to make something stronger. So we do suggest having conversations about it and getting together, but please put it in print. Please put some activities out there for some self-reflection. And maybe that's a way to almost flip classroom this, right? You put something out for self-reflection, and the next time you have a meeting, you talk about what was in the newsletter, and you have a DEI activity in there, then I think that's a great time to bring it up. But just some initial thoughts. Jessie or Constance?
Yes, actually, in our group, we have a book club, and we have read several books that engender a conversation about various aspects of race and racism. We just recently read Minor Feelings, which focuses on Asian American racism against Asian Americans. I recommend it, by the way. It's by Kathy Hong. And the next book that we're reading is Caste, which I also recommend very highly, by Isabel Wilkerson, which will be a very important conversation about race and racism in the United States. So I think that's another way that we can get the conversation going and get people interested.
Great, thank you. We have a few questions here about sort of how to access the toolkit and whether it can be downloaded, things of that nature. So I thought it would be good to just review sort of what's available right now on the website. All of the resources that we've talked about today are available from the website. There aren't really any downloads except for in the additional resources sections. There may be some links out to an article. It may link to a PDF. There are a bunch of different resources there, and they're kind of all kinds. Some videos are there as well. So there isn't really something that you sort of download and have as a PDF. It's more the presence is on the website because given the extent of really what's there. So I think that I put the link to the toolkit in the chat earlier. So please do just link over and check out all of those resources. Let me take a look here and see what else we have in the Q&A. A lot of thank yous, which I totally agree with. Let's see here. Do we have any recommendations for activities at the state level as opposed to branches? Constance, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on this. I think you're probably a little more familiar with the sort of branch state dynamics than our national members. I'm happy to speak to this as well.
Yeah, I actually don't. I am in touch with our state person, but we have not spoken recently, so I don't know what the plan is yet.
Yeah, so each state is really encouraged to have a DEI chair, and that really works differently in each state, to be perfectly honest. All of our states work a little bit differently, and the state organizations have different tasks in the state. So, really would recommend if you're interested in this work and coordinating it at the state level, there is a group of state diversity chairs that gets together. And if you want to email us, we can connect you with those folks as well with that. So it sort of helps you define what those parameters and what sort of programming you might want to do. If it's programming, if it's coordination within the state, what that looks like for your state. So it's not a set answer, I think, for just this is what you should do, period. It's more working with you to figure out what works best for your state and how best to support the branches and the branch leaders within your state as well. Do we have a goal for local branches to move forward, and how will we know if the goal is met?
I think that the goal for local branches really is defined by branch leadership, right? So my viewpoint, at least for the I&E committee, is we want to give everyone resources to help meet their own goals. And we'll, one of the other questions was, is there going to be a DEI 5-star program? And we're definitely going to look at that for this next year. So we'll keep you posted on that. But in terms of having like actual national goals that we want our branches to meet in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, I think that because everyone's different, every branch is different, that we can't have a standardized goal. So we really want to just help you meet your own goals, and your feedback on if we're helping or not is always appreciated.
From Sue, we have this question. I've heard several times from friends and a sister that as many groups go through this process, groups that aren't very diverse seem to be able to dutifully check off the check boxes on the list in their organization's toolkit and come to the conclusion that it was an interesting exercise, but end up concluding that it doesn't really apply to them because they aren't racist or homophobic. Any suggestions on how to make the exercises more meaningful if the group is not diverse to begin with?
Go ahead,
You,
Melissa.
Jessie. Oh no.
That's a tough one.
Go ahead,
sorry.
Constance. You go first.
No, actually, I was just thinking this through, and the question. So, if I understand it, the group is not diverse, so they don't think that they need to talk about diversity and inclusion. But the diversity and inclusion, as we saw, from what Jessie talked about earlier and others, is a bigger topic than that. And so, I think if we're going to be talking about race and racism, or diversity and inclusion in the context of race and racism. And I think that's the message that might need to be gotten through, is that we want to talk about structural racism and racism, which then leads to a conversation about diversity and inclusion, maybe not in that immediate group, but in society in general. Maybe that's just my first thought.
I think somebody actually, I can't find it now because I'm trying to scroll through the questions. Somebody actually mentioned Project Implicit, I think that it was. And I can't find it now. But I think anything, like Constance says, anything that you can think about in terms of like diversity of the group at hand is great. But I also think just starting to introduce the idea to the group that because you're a human being, you have biases, and that like it's not a bad thing. It's the way that we were built, is, you know, and constantly reminding yourself, I am human, I have biases, it doesn't make me a bad person, but it's something that I need to constantly be aware of. And if you can get your group to just start thinking in that way, that then, you know, revisiting some of the activities that where you might have checked a box before take on a whole different meanings. I also would highly recommend for groups that are predominantly white to, and again, this is great for anybody, but particularly for groups that are predominantly white, doing like a group book. It's a workbook that I think is really helpful, called Me and White Supremacy. And actually, like as a group, working through some of those activities is, I think, can help groups really think about how the implicit bias seeps into every day, every way that we interact with society. And then you can expand outwards as to other types of biases as well.
I absolutely agree with what Jessie said, and she said what I was trying to say much more articulately. So,
Constance, could you share the name of the first book you mentioned? There was a question on that in the Q&A.
it's called Minor, M-I-N-O-R, Feelings by Kathy Hong, H-O-N-G. It's a collection of essays that she's written. She's a poet, but she's written a couple of a collection of essays about her experience as an Asian American in the United States.
Terrific, thank you.
And it's relatively new.
This is kind of an interesting question. Do you recommend that the board, and I think they mean their branch board, participate in DEI activities, excuse me, prior to presenting to branches?
I think so. I think that it's important for leadership to figure out where they are, so that they understand their goals and maybe how their own biases or viewpoints in general may influence the rest of the team. So I think it is good for the leadership team to understand where they are, so that when they take part in these activities with everyone else, they already kind of understand and maybe can help guide some of their own goals and share and be a little like vulnerable and build that trust with their team members and leadership.
Great, thank you. Just look through here to see. I do want to say there were a couple questions about the slides. The recording of this will be made available on the website. It probably, I don't know, it usually takes about a week or so before we get it back from the Zoom people and get it all prepared for everybody. So that will be available on the member page of the website. It is not password protected. You do not have to go to a special page or log in. It is just there on the website under membership, and then it's sort of in the middle of the screen under webinars. Let's see here. Jessie, can you repeat the title of your book? I believe it was Me and White Supremacy.
Me and White Supremacy. Yep. Perfect.
Thank you. All right. Well, we have gone through our entire hour today, and I thank you so much to our three panelists for their presentation today and also for their answers to all the really great questions in the chat. I know there's a lot of interest in these topics, and this is not easy work. It's something that is a long-term project and a long-term, really lifelong journey for all of us. And we really look forward to seeing you at a future webinar as we have more plug and plays that are going to be coming online next year. And please do respond to that survey that'll be sent out probably the next week or so. If you have additional suggestions, we have some in the Q&A today that I've noted, and that we'll make sure that gets back to the committee. But that's also a good opportunity for you to take some time, think about what we've discussed today and what you've heard today, and really definitely give us some feedback on new topics that you would like to see in the future. So with that, I just wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.